You might see me look sideways once in a while because I have my notes on another monitor, so I'm not reading anything other than what we're talking about here. Um, so I will definitely encourage questions at the end. There are a lot of complexities and set of circumstances when it comes to uh, navigating the legislation around residential tenancies. So the role of our office, I still find it hard to believe sometimes that a lot of people don't know that we exist. We used to be known as the rentalsmen. Now we're known as the Residential Tenancies Tribunal of New Brunswick. And our role is to apply the law to enforce the legislation around residential tenancies. It's to investigate complaints, mediation and education is our two primary goals. The more we mediate, the more we educate, the less work we have. Um, Administer the security deposits. That's a separate team within the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. And when all else fails, when the dispute cannot be mediated, we render decisions. From time to time, we have to take court action. We will proceed with charges against a landlord or a tenant when certain offenses are committed and we cannot get around it. So for example, a landlord that fails to remit a security deposit and we can't mediate the situation, they just will not answer our calls or they will not agree to remit the security deposit with our office, which is the law in the province of New Brunswick. Then we at times we lay charges in provincial court. Our office is made up of three different groups. The first group is the intake group. These are the people that receive your uh, applications for assistance when something goes wrong. Then once they've put the case together, they've completed the application and they get at least one document to support your application, whether it be a lease or notice of complaint or notice of some sort. They will escalate that case to what we refer to as information agents. The information agents are the ones that are building the case, that are trying to conciliate the dispute. You're applying because there's a dispute of some sort. Something has gone wrong in the agreement or the arrangement that you have between the tenant and the landlord. In the tenancy, you need assistance in some way. So we try at the information agent level to conciliate the matter. If that doesn't work, then it has to be escalated at the level that we call the officers. The officers are appointed adjudicators by the province of New Brunswick. We have 8 of them. And those people they come from a very diverse background. We have a lawyer, we have 2 teachers, one of them with a master's degree in mediation and international mediation at that. He worked in China for a number of years. We have some people that have worked in social development for years, enforcement with child abuse cases in British Columbia. We have police officers. I was with the RCMP for 33 years. We have another officer in Moncton. So we all come from a very diverse background, and we pull our skills and experiences together, and that forms what we know here as the officers of the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. Um, so the obligations of a tenant and a landlord when you embark into an agreement of some sort in relation to tenancy. So you're arriving, you're going to be seeking a place to live, you're willing to pay. So the minute that you make that agreement and you disperse some money and somebody accepts it, you've got yourself a tenancy. And there's a starting date and there's potentially an ending date. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the obligations of the the landlord could be an owner or they could be an agent for the owner. That often happens in the larger companies like the Killam's or the 3D Properties, Canada Homes. They're very large management companies that charge a fee to owners who own a lot of apartment buildings or duplexes or what have you. And they don't often live in the province and the management companies. So they have the same obligations. And the obligations are towards um, cleanliness, having the place to be safe, that it needs to meet certain local and provincial codes. It has to be to be safe, and it needs to meet all of the health and safety rules, and it has to be insured, of course, and the landlord has to provide you with if there is a lease, they have to provide you with a signed copy of that lease. And if there isn't lease, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there usually is a lease if in a case where students are renting from a landlord. The obligation of the tenant, first and foremost, and you cannot find a reason not to do this, you have to pay your rent. I cannot say that enough. The reason I say that is because we hear often, well, I'm not paying my rent because I asked the landlord to fix the window and they're not fixing it. Or I'm not paying my rent because my landlord didn't remit my security deposit. And I'm not paying my rent because I just don't like my landlord. Well, it doesn't work that way. So there are no reasons in the law where you can have an excuse for not paying your rent. So I'll reinforce that by telling you, you could have the worst landlord in the world, and the landlord could be guilty of everything under the legislation. If you fail to pay your rent and the landlord serves a notice in relation to that, they can ask for to end the tenancy, and if you don't leave, they could ask for an eviction. So I'm going to say it one more time. There are zero reasons for not paying your rent. You cannot do that. It's not like buying something at the store and you're returning it or you're borrowing it, whatever. Um, you have to keep the property in good disrepair, good repair. You have to repair or fix any damages that you may cause. Now, it might not be you yourself. Could be a co-tenant. It could be someone that was visiting you. It could be the local Amazon delivery person who broke something on the deck as they were bringing in a big box. You are responsible for that. So you can't turn around and say, well, it was the Amazon guy. I wasn't even here. Doesn't matter. You're the tenant. You're responsible for the premises at the time that you occupy the premises. You have a responsibility in relation to behavior, your co-tenant's behavior, and your friend's behavior. In other words, if there's a lot of parties going on, or noise, excessive noise, or other types of behavior problem, in and out traffic at all hours of the night, for whatever reason, that sort of thing, it's your responsibility. So your landlord could make an application with us that could lead to us issuing a compliance order. And if we do that, and you don't obey by the compliance order, we could end the tenancy. We do it in cases where we can't seem to find a way out. The tenant or the landlord, we do give compliance orders to landlords as well when they don't meet their obligations. And the remedy to that, when it doesn't work, when one of the two parties doesn't obey the order, we end the tenancy. The lease. So in New Brunswick, if there is no lease, if you have a tenancy, you've made an agreement, you're paying rent, you may or may not be have paid a security deposit. The lease, usually there is one, but if there isn't, then we treat your tenancy under the law as if you had an existing standard form lease, which is the lease that we have on our webpage, for a month-to-month tenancy. So you'll understand shortly what a month-to-month tenancy means, because there are various types of tenancies in the province of New Brunswick. So if there is no lease, you have a month-to-month tenancy based on a basic standard form lease, meaning there are no special conditions. It's just as if they just filled out the lease the way it is, and you agreed to it, period. It's that simple. You should ask for a lease. You should ask to see the lease before you sign it. Always, never ever sign a lease without reading it, because there could be something in the back pages somewhere that says you're obligated to do something or not do something. For example, not having any pets, and you show up with a pet and your landlord finds out and they say you have to get rid of your pet, otherwise you have to leave. So that's a bad position to be in. So read every word. And if you're not sure, ask the questions to your landlord. And if you're not sure, reach out to our office to ask questions about what could be seen by yourself as being kind of odd as a condition in the lease. The second thing is, it's very important that you have a signed copy of that lease. We run into that over and over and over again, where there's a dispute between the tenant and the landlord, and one of the two parties says, well, I don't have a signed copy, I just have a lease, but I never signed it. Well, you have to sign it. The lease is a contract. Don't forget something when you're paying rent to a landlord. That landlord is a business person. They're in the business of residential tenancies. They're in the business of making a living in some way by renting out buildings, rooms, houses, apartments. You are in the business of looking for a place to live. So you're going to a business person to make that arrangement. Be smart about this. Get a signed lease. So it's important that you pay very close attention to what it says in the lease. And it's important also that you understand the types of leases. So I've already talked about the month to month. That means that you're paying the rent every month, first of the month. And if they want to end the tenancy, if the landlord decides all of a sudden they want to end the tenancy, or you want to end the tenancy, goes both ways, you only need to give 1 month's notice on a month-to-month tenancy. If there's no lease, it's automatic month-to-month, unless you have some kind of other written agreement, okay? You can also have a year-to-year lease or tenancy agreement. Year-to-year means you have a startup date and you have an ending date. Let's just say it starts on the 1st of January and it ends on 31st of December for the sake of argument. There's a little thing that you have to be very careful with a year-to-year lease. In order for you to end that tenancy legally, you have to give 3 months notice prior to the end of that lease or that agreement or that tenancy, meaning 3 months prior to the 31st of December, right? If you don't do that, if you don't give notice and you just think you could leave on the 31st of December, it automatically renews on the 1st of January for another year. So year to year are tricky. If you don't give notice, it just renews for a whole year the day after the termination date. So you have to get, but it goes both ways. You have to give 3 months, the landlord has to give 3 months from the ending date to terminate the tenancy. Then you have fixed term lease. Fixed term lease is, it starts on a particular day and it ends on a particular date. That's it. If you want to stay, you got to sign up another lease. So you already know what the lease is going to be, what the agreement is, what the startup date is, and the ending date is. You can have a weekly type arrangement when you're into rooming houses, but you see that more with certain types of buildings in the cities. I'm not too sure that you would run into that where you are. It's very important you both get a copy, the landlord and you both signed. Sign that lease with your landlord. When you're going to do that and you're about to see where you're going to live for the first time, or in your case, you may have a friend. You live in Halifax, you live in BC, you live somewhere in the country, or you're a foreign student and you don't have the ability to be there on the day before or the week before the tenancy begins, and you have a friend, you have somebody from your council, Sydney, that's able to go and have a look at the apartment, make sure that everything is okay in there. Get an inspection report done. You have to get an inspection report done. We have the form on our website. It just protects you. We just had a hearing just before we started this presentation today. We had a hearing in relation to a security deposit that the landlord wanted to claim against for repairs. The tenancy ended last year. We finally have the hearing now. There's all sorts of evidence that the tenant is presenting and the landlord is presenting, but one thing they don't have is an inspection report. And that was one of the things that one of our adjudicators said, did you tell your landlord in any way about those holes in the walls that you now say were there 2 years ago when you first moved in? Well, they were there and this and that, and they go on and, well, no. Listen to the question. Did you tell the landlord? Did you identify that this was an issue? Because now your landlord 2 years later says, I had to spend $500 to repair those holes. And you have no evidence to counter that. You have no, so the inspection report is critical. It's critical for the landlord as much as it's critical for the tenant. Get a report. It only takes a little time to go through the apartment. It's just a tick, some comments here and there to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. The stove is looking old. It should say that. Because if the landlord is asking us to give them money from your security deposit once your tenancy ends to replace those tops, the burners on the stove, or the scratched glass top on the stove, and you can't prove that it was like that when you moved in, no pictures, no report, you can't blame the adjudicator for taking the landlord's word and pictures at the end of the tenancy when you move out that now the scratches are there. Oh no, they were there when I moved in. Well, how do you know? Can you show me? I wasn't there when you moved in. So protect yourself. All this to tell you, protect yourselves. Be smart. So get a report. The types of notices that you can get during a tenancy or that you can give during a tenancy. So the first thing that you need to know about, if you go on our website, look for the notices of complaint. If you're going to come to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal for help, now remember, we manage tenancies. So if you need help, you come to us. The first thing we're going to ask you, did you talk to your landlord and did you give them a notice of complaint? Notice of complaint can be an email, can be a written piece of paper, but we have a form that's very helpful on our website. It's called a notice of complaint. And what it says is simply tell your landlord what the problem is. My door won't lock. My door won't shut. The heat doesn't work. The windows are let all the cold air in my room in the wintertime. My window's broken. The hot water is not working. The stove, whatever the case is, you can't come applying for assistance before you give a notice of complaint to your landlord and how much time you want to give them to fix the problem. In some time, it might be immediate. Other times it might be, you might give them 7 days or 2 weeks if it's a serious issue that's going to take a little time to fix. But the point of all this is you can't expect our department to force the landlord to do something before you've identified the problem to the landlord in the first place, right? So the first step that you need to follow whenever there's a problem of any kind with your tenancy, talk to your landlord. And we're telling the landlord the exact same thing. If you're having a problem with a tenant, they're partying every night, they're breaking bottles, they're bothering the neighbors, whatever. A tenant is smoking in a building that's not supposed to be smoking. They have a dog, they're not supposed to have a dog. The first thing we tell them, give a tenant a notice of complaint. Talk to the tenant because you have to give the tenant or the landlord, whoever, the chance to rectify the issue before we order them to rectify the issue. That's the point behind the notice of complaint. You can have notices for if a landlord wants to come and inspect your place, they have to give you a certain amount of time. They can give you a notice for coming to repair something. They can give you a notice because you didn't pay your rent. So that's called a notice to vacate. They can give you a notice to terminate your tenancy. They can give you a notice to raise your rent. They can give you a notice to alter the conditions in the lease or the agreement if there is no lease. So there's a number of different notices, but it's suffice to say that if you want to do something in relation to your tenancy or the landlord wants to change something or add something or do something that's going to impact the tenancy in some way, ultimately end it possibly, they have to give you a notice. It's all legislated. It all depends on the type of tenancy that you have. They have to give 3 months, 1 month, 7 days. there's a number of different timelines. If you get something like this, it's very easy to look up on our website or in the handbook. You'll find out exactly, and it's legislated. So if you get improper notice or you provide improper notice, whatever it is that you're giving the notice for is going to be void. So in other words, if you want to end your tenancy, for example, at the end of a year-to-year date, year-to-year tenancy, and your tenancy ends on the 31st of December, and you give the notice to the landlord a couple of days short of 3 months. Well, guess what? We cannot allow you to end your tenancy legally because the law says you have to give 3 months. It's not a question of us making that choice. It's in the law. So whether we like it or not, sometimes we have cases where landlord have a real hard time with a tenant, terrible tenants, drug traffickers and crime involved and all sorts of problems, and they miss the deadline in their notice to vacate or their notice to end the tenancy, and we feel terrible, but we can't break the law, right? We're enforcing the law around residential tenancy, so we can't say, oh yeah, well, don't worry about it, we'll make it work. We can't do that. So the notice has to be served on a certain time with a certain timeline. That's just the way it is. So we don't have any flexibility around that. The famous security deposits. Landlords are not obligated to charge a security deposit. But if they do, there's a couple of rules that they're in the law. So if you're going to write down anything, now's the time. The first rule, if they choose to charge a security deposit, the security deposit can never be higher than the 1 month's rent. So that means it can be lower, but it can never be higher. So if you're paying $1,000 a month, they cannot charge you 1,001. So it's 1,000. There is no such thing as first and last month's rent. If you're dealing with a really old landlord, sometimes that's what they call a security deposit. First month's rent and the last month's rent is your security deposit. That's not true. There is no such thing. In New Brunswick, a landlord can charge for 2 things and 2 things only: rent and a security deposit that will not exceed 1 month's rent. Those are the only 2 things they can charge. There's an exception in relation to some services like snow removal or lawn care and that sort of thing, but very few exceptions. The second big rule about security deposits, they don't have a choice. It has to be remitted or given to our office within 15 days of the day they receive it in their hands or their bank account. The problem with security deposits in relation to remittance is this. Most often, the security deposit is paid quite a ways ahead, quite a bit of time ahead of the time that you arrive to occupy the apartment. Your tenancy starts on the 1st of June. Often you will have paid a security deposit to sort of hold the place 2 or 3 months ahead of time. That happens quite a bit, actually. It doesn't matter. The landlord has to remit that security deposit within 15 days of receiving it, even if it's 2 months ahead. So what do you do? A lot of landlords do not remit. So before paying the security deposit, ask the questions. Will you remit the security deposit to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal? Oh, yeah, we don't have to do that. No, you do. It's the law. It's section 812 or 8 point, I forget. It's in section 8 of the Residential Tenancies Tribunal, where they have 15 days from the day they put their hands on it to remit. And I insist on that because that is the number one issue with students. It's the number one issue that we bring landlords to court. And there's a very easy way around it for you. Go to an office of Service New Brunswick, deposit it yourself. What's going to happen is they're going to create a tenancy. It is going to create a tenancy. You're going to get a receipt, and the landlord is going to get a certificate that a security deposit is being held in trust with our office. If they remit it, they also get a certificate, and so do you. The reason that is because at the end of the tenancy, that is a security for a landlord to claim against that money if you left the place in a mess, if you broke anything, if you didn't pay your rent. If you didn't pay your rent, they can claim. They can claim up to the total amount of your security deposit. If you left a few days early or left in the middle of the night, didn't give proper notice, and the landlord could not re-rent in time for that month, they're allowed to claim against a security deposit for that loss of income for that month. They have to take steps to try to re-rent, but in a lot of cases they can't because of timing. So they lose a month's rent. So they can claim against your security deposit. But we won't allow a claim if they did not remit. They have to remit it in time. Your best bet, if you're in Sackville, go to SNB in Sackville, go to the service counter. You don't need the residential. Just say, I have a security deposit here. What you'll need is you'll need the name of your landlord, his address, and the address where you're going to. What's the apartment number? What's the address? What's the postal code? And then they will create that tenancy and you're golden. And in a lot of cases, when you have a good landlord and he's a good business person, they much prefer that because they don't have to worry about it. All they care about is that certificate, because they know you can't access that money unless they agree to it or unless we order it. So it's a safety for them as well to have that certificate, and it's a safety for you as well. So there'll be some questions, I'm sure, after on the security deposit, but on the security deposit, just make sure that you ask those questions ahead of time. Are you going to remit the security deposit? Because a year later, it's too late for that. Too late. The landlord, once you're done your tenancy, you know your tenancy is about to end, you're a few days away, go on the website, apply for a refund of your security deposit right away. The reason that is because you're going to be asked to enter your new address in that form. Where are you going? And if you don't know where you're going yet, put your parents' address or your significant other somewhere where we can send the money. There's a lot of money sitting in our coffers because we don't know where the people are. They never applied. The money's sitting there. We're not going to spend it. Obviously, it's government department, and we're holding this money in trust for the landlord. Didn't claim against it, and the tenant, we don't know where they are. So apply for, it's very important. Go on the website, apply for a refund of your security deposit. That generates a case. We then advise the landlord, Mr. Landlord, your ex-tenant or soon to be ex-tenant has applied for the security deposit. Are you, just letting you know, they have 7 days by law within, right immediately after the end of the tenancy. Within 7 days, they need to enter a claim if they want that claim to go forward. If they don't, they wait until the 8th day, no claim, it's late. Why? Because it's in the law. Could be the best landlord in the world, could be the worst tenant in the world. If they claim on the 8th day after the tenancy is over, they cannot make a claim. It's very clear, 7 days. Therefore, the money goes back to the tenant. I'll get into the dispute resolution in a minute here in relation to security deposit, but that's basically it. You can also have an agreement. If you want your security deposit to go quick, there's another form that's called agreement for refund that your landlord can sign. You send that in by email to us, and boom, we release it immediately to you. If you've been a good tenant, the landlord has no reason to make a claim against your security deposit, or even better, let's say you did break something. It happens, right? You fell, you bit of a hole in the wall. Landlord says, that's going to cost me $200 to fix that. And you say, you know what? I got $1,000 security deposit. How about you? I'll sign the form. I'll get the form from the website. You agree to keep 200. I agree to keep 800. Boom. Everybody's happy. Perfect. You send that to us, immediately disperse. We're going to send the funds to him, the landlord, and to you right away. That's the easiest way to get your money back immediately, is to sign, have that agreement form signed. It's on our website. Where are we? Evictions. Remember what I said? You got to pay your rent. You got to pay your rent. There's no reason not to pay your rent. So there's 2 ways to end a tenancy in New Brunswick. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's 3 ways, I guess, if the 2 parties agree, irregardless of the type of lease that you have or tenancy agreement that you have, whether it's a month-to-month or fixed term. If the landlord says, I understand that your parents are sick, you got to go, I'm good with that, go ahead, I've got somebody else that will rent. Make sure that's in writing. because a year later, that's not worth anything if it's not in writing. Text message, email, piece of paper, you have to have it in writing. Protect yourself, right? Don't just take the word of the landlord. Landlord could be a very good person, but things happen in people's lives, in your life, in the landlord's life. Things go wrong. And all of a sudden, agreements that were made at a particular time change. And if they're not in writing, what are we to do? We're not involved in this. You're coming to us for help. We're going to go with evidence. Everything we do is based on evidence, just like a court. So make sure you protect yourself. You have an agreement to leave early, ask the landlord to sign here or send a text, and just to confirm that we've agreed over the phone that we're going to leave on the 31st of July. I'll give you an example of somebody that's playing games all the time. It's a landlord, and he's done that over and over again, and we're having a really hard time catching him. Somebody will say that on a text message. We talked on the phone yesterday, and you've agreed that we can leave on the 31st. And he'll say something that's not really an agreement. He'll say, um, sounds fine, or whatever. It will lead you to believe that he's saying yes, but when we look at it, he never said that. He didn't say, yes, it's okay for you to leave on the 31st. And if you're trying to get it on an email or something, he'll say, call me, because he's constantly leaving himself an out. So be careful. There are bad tenants and there are bad business people. They're mostly good. We have very few problems with landlords in the province, and we have few problems with the tenants. For the most part, things are going well. But every once in a while, something goes wrong. So protect yourself. Very important. So another way that a landlord can end a tenancy is if you don't pay your rent. So your rent is due on the first of the month, unless it's stipulated in your agreement differently, but I don't see that very often. If it's on the first of the month, that means you got to pay your rent on the first of the month. The morning of the second, if you haven't paid your rent, the landlord can serve you a notice to vacate. It's called a notice to vacate. The notice to vacate, you have 7 days from that day that you receive that notice to pay all rent due for that month and anything else that you owed before that, all of it. If you don't, if you come up on the 8th day, the landlord can say, no, I'm not taking your money. I want you out by the 15th. And then if you're not out by the 15th, they come to us for an eviction. And if everything is in order, you're going to be evicted by the sheriff. So don't put yourself in that predicament. So if you're having a hard month, if you're having some difficulty at any given time with money, contact your landlord, make an agreement if you can, and put it on paper. Today, obviously, paper means paper, text message, email, something that you can give us to show that you have an agreement. Payment plan. Landlords will call that a payment plan. Sometimes when a landlord gives a notice to vacate, we don't just evict. We always do an investigation. And let's say that a student tells us that they've fallen on hard times, they're having a hard time coming up with the rent money. We'll contact the landlord. If you're a good tenant, the landlord wants to keep you. They don't want to lose good tenant because it's good income. They're business people. Good tenant equals I want that tenant in my building. So we will act as a mediator between you and the landlord to try and come up with a payment plan. Let's see if we can catch you up over a period of 2 or 3 months. And then the notice to vacate will be void. Simple as that. Another way to end a tenancy is in New Brunswick. This is very important. In New Brunswick, a landlord does not need a reason to end a tenancy at the end of a period. So if it's a month to month, they can give you a notice to terminate with a month's notice stating at the end of the month, you got to go, or at the end of the next month. If it's a year to year, they have to give you the 3 months notice before the end of the year. Fixed term, they can't. And if it's a long-term tenancy, well, that's a whole different story, but you don't have to worry about that. You won't be involved in one of those. The process to evict, that's a sheriff. But again, we do an investigation. If a landlord applies with us, we don't just sign a paper and send it. We investigate, we contact both parties, we make sure all the paperwork is in order, and we always want to hear from the tenant. And I can tell you that a very high percentage of the evictions that we do order is almost always because the tenant will not respond to our inquiries. We send letters, we send post, express post, we call, we leave messages, we send emails, send text, and they won't reply, they won't respond. So that's the type, usually a lot, that's the majority of cases of eviction that we have. When we have a tenant that answers to our request to investigate, we need to speak with you, we need to understand what your circumstances are. Often we are able to mediate the situation. There are 5 steps you're going to be told of if you come to us for assistance. Now, how can you come to us for assistance? You can apply online. You can apply at the service counter at SNB. You can send regular mail. You can send an email at SNB, the SNB, iRent SNB email, and we will begin an investigation. But the first thing we're going to ask you is, did you follow the 5 steps? And the portion of the 5 steps that you have is first dialogue. You need to talk to your landlord if you have a problem. You can't come directly to us to do the talking for you. You come to us when you can't come to an agreement. That's when we get involved. Or if there's an offense involved and the landlord's not willing to listen. The second point is you need to do the notice of complaint. Remember I talked about that earlier. Notice of complaint, whether it's an email where you express what the problem is, whether it's a text, or whether you decide to use the form we have on our website. You need to do that. That fails, number 3, come to us. Then you participate in the investigation. So overall, that's about what the Residential Tenancies Tribunal does, and that is basically some of the complexities or the issues that you can expect to perhaps face when you're in a tenancy agreement, and some of the things you got to be careful of, protect yourself. And I say this in all honesty that 99.9% of the people that we see involved in tenancies do not have problems. Good landlords, good tenants. I forget how many thousands and thousands of tenancies that we have in New Brunswick, and we only have a very small percentage of problems. But we exist for a reason, because when there are problems, it can have a significant impact on you, on your well-being, on your ability to have a place to live. So that's why we exist. There's a legislation. We need to enforce it. We need to manage it, and we need to help people navigate all of the obligations within that legislation. 2 things, 417, just 2 things before we go. Pets. If you've been in New Brunswick for more than a year, you've probably heard a lot about pet fees on the news. There is no such thing as pet fees. What there is prohibited fees. So as I said earlier, a landlord cannot charge for anything else than rent and a security deposit. So let's talk about rent for a minute. If they charge you $1,000 a month for rent, they cannot charge you a separate fee that is not incorporated in the rent because you want to have a pet. Can't do that. That's illegal outright. It's called a prohibited fee, not a pet fee. It's called a prohibited fee. So we've told all of the landlords of this. It's very well known now. If somebody tells you they want to charge you a pet fee, the first thing you ask is that going to be part of the rent, or is that going to be a separate fee? If they say it's a separate fee, you can't do that. So if you're already in the tenancy and you're paying $1,000 a month and you want to have a pet, and you ask your landlord, and the landlord, absolutely, the correct answer by the landlord will be your rent is going to go up by X. Usually it's about $25 or $35 a month. It's going to go up, and then they have to give you a proper notice of rent increase. They can't just increase the rent like that. They have to give you a proper notice that they want to increase your rent. So they can't turn around and say, you're going to have to pay me $25 extra every month over and above your rent. That's illegal. The second piece that's illegal about pets, some landlords ask for, and I suspect with students that happens a lot because you're not there for a long time. So what they do is they ask for a pet damage deposit. So your rent's 1,000, you're going to pay 1,000 damage deposit, and then they say because you're bringing a cat, they're going to make all kinds of scratches on my floor and this and that. We're going to charge you an extra $300 pet damage deposit up front. That is not only illegal, we can actually order the landlord to reimburse that if you do pay it. If you were not paying attention, I guess, and you did pay it, we can order the landlord to reimburse that forthwith. That's illegal as well. And if they don't, we can charge them in court. Doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. So that's the thing about pets. Make sure that you ask the questions if you're allowed, if you want a pet, because it can make a big difference if you don't do it right. The second piece, and if you forget anything else, everything else, don't forget this. Subletting does not exist. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. I've spoken to Sydney about this. I know it's a big deal for Sackville students, but in the law, subletting does not exist. There is nothing in the Residential Tenancy Act in New Brunswick that gives authority for anything to do with subletting. And I understand why you do it. I understand that you're often called upon to go on an internship somewhere else. You don't want to lose your tenancy agreement. You have a friend that's going to stay there for a month or a week or whatever. Here's what you need to know. If you sublease, you are not losing or foregoing any of your obligation as the tenant for that tenancy. You're the tenant no matter what. And there's some um, uh, statements that were made in the past that you become a landlord or a sub-landlord to that person you're going to sublet to. Okay, let's just go with that for a minute. You're collecting the rent from that person and you're passing the rent on to your landlord. First of all, your landlord may not be happy that you're doing this because maybe the person you're subletting to is a problem. Maybe you're the greatest tenant, but that other person isn't. You're responsible. If you come to us as a tenant and say, well, my landlord wants me out because I've been having parties, I'm not even there. I'm working in South Africa as an intern for whatever, and my cousin is staying there for 2 months, and I've sublet to her. You're potentially responsible. There is, however, a very good section in the Act around assignment, where you assign your rights and your obligations and your benefits of that residency or tenancy to someone else, and you walk away. You need the approval of your landlord, but your landlord cannot refuse without due cause. So if you're leaving early for whatever reason, and you don't want to break your tenancy because you could lose your damage deposit, you've been a good tenant, all these things, you don't want to damage your reputation, you have a good relationship with your landlord, and perhaps you have 3 or 4 other people living with you, and they're not too happy that all of a sudden you got to go and they're going to be stuck with the extra rent. So what do? You assign. So have a look at this website on that. It's called assignment. It's covered in the legislation. There's a form for assignment. And when you do that, if I assign my rights, my obligations, and my tenancy, everything to do with my tenancy to Sydney, Sydney becomes the new tenant. I'm gone. She can pay me the security deposit, or you can make arrangements to make the change officially with at SNB or with our department. If you're going to be leaving early, if you need to break your tenancy early, if you are living with more than one person in a tenancy, that's the way to go. I'm not going to tell you not to sublet because I can understand where that could be necessary under certain circumstances. What you need to know is I have no authority under the Residential Tenancies Act of New Brunswick to enforce anything around subletting. Does not exist in the law. So it becomes very complicated. We handle it on a case per case, and sometimes it doesn't go your way. So it suffices to say, if you're going to sublet and things go wrong while you're away, there's a very good chance you are responsible under the Residential Tenancies Act. I'm not going to say with certainty for every case. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying because it's not covered, you're subletting, you could be facing problems. Okay? So I think I've said enough. I'm going to take a breath, and I'll let Sydney take over.
Sounds good. Thank you, Steve. We'll jump right over to questions. I know we just got one in the chat. Could assignment be temporary, for example, over the summer, if the tenant is leaving for a couple months and then coming back to the property? We kind of had this conversation about like students leaving during their tenancy but wanting to come back, and one student just wants a little bit more clarification on that.
Usually, no. The simple answer is no. Usually, it's not.
Okay.
So have a look at the form and you'll see why I say that. Usually when you walk away under an assignment. And that's why I said I do understand why you would want in some cases to sublet, as you call it, not as I call it.
Yeah. Because I guess then in that case, we like students here do still sublet, and students can still do that. But I guess just to clarify, it's not protected under law.
Yes. Yeah.
Just for students to remember that it's still their responsibility what happens in their unit.
It could be seen to be, yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We did get another question in the chat. How does a tenant know if their landlord has properly remitted the damage deposit to the Residential Tenancies Tribunal office?
That's a very good question. That's why I say ask the questions before you give the money, right? First thing, ask the question. Secondly, you can do it yourself. You don't need to give it to the landlord. You can give it right to SNB. And if the landlord says, no, that's not how I do it, well, there might be something wrong there, right? The way you're going to know is you're going to receive a certificate. Both the landlord and the tenant receive a certificate when the funds are deposited with us in trust. If you don't get a certificate within a short period of time, I think it's about 15 or 30 days at the most, depending on the time of year and how many we're getting. When you have an influx of students coming in, obviously we get a ton. So it might be a little delayed, but it's never longer than a month. You'll get a certificate in the mail. You can always call us. If you get a little worried, a couple of weeks have gone by, call the number, we'll check, and we'll tell you right away if it's there or not.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or just unmute yourself or type it into the chat. I know we had some people who joined a little bit later than when we started. We'll give people some time if they want to type anything up.
Sure. I'm just trying to find the terminology for a particular aspect of tenancy that has to do with students, in particular when you're living with more than one person, well, a number of tenants together. I'm just going to keep looking here while you wait. Joint and several. So there is a piece in the legislation that says, so you're living with someone else in a tenancy. You paid your portion of security deposit. It's $1,000 a month, $1,000 security deposit. You pay $500. Your friend or family member living with you pays their $500. The tenancy ends. You want your money back. In order for you, we can release it to you. We'll release your portion of it. If you're leaving in the middle of it, you can still get your portion. It becomes a problem if you want to leave in the middle of your tenancy and the others don't, and you're not assigning. Doesn't work that way. So it's when we say joint and several is we're looking at the group of people involved in one tenancy. So if the tenancy ends for one, it ends for everybody. A landlord, in other words, cannot kick you out, Sydney, because you're the one partying all the time and your three friends aren't. Can't do that. The reverse is the same. You can't say I'm leaving, I don't like it here anymore, or you get, let's say you terrible thing, you get expulsed from the university. You can't be there anymore. Well, if you're leaving, the tenancy is over for everybody. One person cannot break their little portion of the tenancy. It's all or nothing. Joint and several is what it means, basically. We don't see that very often, but when we do see it, it's usually with students because of the types of tenancies that you have. You often live together.
That's good to know. We did get a question from Hannah, who said she doesn't believe that she received a certificate for her security deposit and was asking where they often get sent to.
Well, they'd be sent to her address, to the premises. So wherever she's living, we call it the premises. That's where the tenancy is. It would be sent to that particular address. So I would suggest, I'm just gonna give you the phone number here. Call the phone number and ask if it's been remitted. When did you pay, Anna? When did you pay the money to the landlord?
I'll just take myself off mute. I don't, if that's okay with you, CD. I don't actually remember when. This was so long ago.
Oh, okay, so it was a long time ago.
It was at the beginning of last year, I believe.
Yeah, you should call, find out, and then you can start the process. So there's a very important piece of information here that, based on your question, Hannah. When a tenancy ends and the student is gone, and all of a sudden they ask the question that you just asked, our only way to recover the money is to bring the landlord to court if they choose not to participate in our efforts to mediate the situation. No, the heck with it. I'm not giving you I'm not remitting. I don't like that tenant. The hell with it. They made damages. They were nothing but a nightmare. I'm not remitting. Well, then we only have one way, is to charge them. But in order to bring that to court, we need to bring you to court. You have to be the witness. Where are you now? You're all done university. You're working somewhere. It's not fun to go to court for anybody. So all of a sudden now you are faced to having to go to court to get your $1,000 back. A lot of times you're going to say, listen, I can't. I just can't do it. I'm working in the States. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. So you're losing $1,000. We have no way to order the landlord after the tenancy is over to reimburse you that money. And we've seen cases where the judges do not order the landlord to reimburse. They just give them a fine for $180. Well, or $288, I think it adds up to. So in your case, Hannah, you're still in the tenancy. Find out if we have the security deposit. Call our number. I'll give you all that number right now while I think of it. So our number is 1-888-762-8600. That is a call center for Service New Brunswick, and they can actually check right there when you're on the phone with them. They have access to our system to see if your money is there. They'll need your tenancy number, but if they didn't remit, there will be no tenancy number. They need the name of your landlord and or the specific address of your premises, and they can find out whether or not the money is there. If it's not there, then that's when you do the 5 steps. You talk to your landlord, you give a notice of complaint to your landlord, you say you are obligated by law. Oh, we don't remit. It's not a choice. There's no such thing as, we're not a club. The Residential Tenancies Tribunal is not a club. You don't just choose to participate or choose to belong to the club. We are a department of the government that enforces a law. And part of the law is you must remit security deposits, no matter what, if you collect them within 15 days. So already that landlord, if they did not remit, is breaking the law. That's a fact. So send you a notice of complaint. What's important, Hannah, is you're still in the tenancy. We have authority to order the landlord to remit immediately because we're still within the tenancy. After the tenancy, we lose jurisdiction. During the tenancy, we have all the authority. So as soon as we get your complaint, we would call the landlord and say, listen, we're hearing that your tenant's been sending you a notice of complaint, you haven't responded, or you said, no, I'm not remitting. You understand you need to remit. We explain the law. And if they don't remit, we send a compliance order immediately. We order them by law to remit. If they don't, we can charge them for failing to remit and charge them for failing to obey our order. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
So tomorrow morning, call your landlord and find out, and call us to find out if they did remit.
We had another question from a student who says, am I correct in thinking that if multiple tenants have signed a lease and one of them fails to pay their portion of the rent, the other members are responsible for paying it, or they can face a notice to vacate?
That's right.
As well?
Yeah, it's joint and several. It's a very good question, and you've got it. Yeah.
We're pretty lucky that usually landlords in Sackville understand that students, they won't always put the responsibility of one student on their roommates, but that is always a risk that can be, that students can face. Yes.
Well, a lot of what we're talking about today, Sydney, is that one business person, that one landlord who's not who sees young people like students normally are as an easy way to make an extra buck. I've seen one in the last 2 years. One that was a clear case of a business person taking advantage of a student not knowing any better in relation to tenancies. So we don't see that very often. But everything I'm telling you today is just to better protect yourself in case you do face that one individual. But for the most part, the landlords are experienced business people. They don't want problems. They want good tenants, and if you're a good tenant, they want to keep you.
Awesome. And we got a thank you in the chat from the student who asked that question as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank yous all around.
Yes, really. I guess we'll give another minute or two if anyone has any other questions that they wanted to ask. If not, we'll wrap up for today. And we'll get this recording up on the website for students to refer back to later. And also I'll encourage, again, I know Steve, you mentioned this before, but encourage students to look at our off-campus housing handbook that's now on the website under our off-campus housing section.
And also go on Google and just type iRent space NB. Our website's going to come up right away. When the page comes up, look on the upper right. There's a little box there, and it talks about tenants forms, and click on that, and there's all kinds of information there specifically about tenancies and all the forms. And when you start to look at the forms, it starts to make sense to you about your questions that you may have after this.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Lots of thank yous in the chat for.
Oh, that's great.
For you.
Hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah, I think so.
I think all jokes aside, in relation to if you forget everything, don't forget this. Just protect yourself. Create a paper trail. Whatever you're going to do, create a paper trail. And if somebody doesn't want to create a paper trail with you, your spidey senses should come up big time. There's something wrong there, right? Why wouldn't you? If you're an honorable person, if you're a good business person, why wouldn't you want to participate in creating good records, right? If you're into texting, use texting. You're into emails, you prefer writing down on a piece of paper, write it down. The format is irrelevant as long as we can refer to it and confirm what you're saying.
That's very great advice. And very important for students to be doing. I know.
Yeah.
That becomes a problem. Awesome. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today and giving this presentation. I know it was really helpful, and we're very glad to be able to.
It's helpful for us too, so we enjoy doing that. That's great.
Good. Awesome.
And send me a copy of your end product, please. Your handbook. I'd really like to have that. It looked great.
I will. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Anytime at all.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Okay.